here to have Lynden Miller as our guest speaker. Lynden Miller is a garden designer who, in the past 40 years, has designed over 40 gardens and public spaces in the 5 boroughs of New York City. Not only that, tomorrow we're pleased that she is opening up her private garden in Sharon for us to tour. So join with me and welcome Lynden Miller.
Even better.
I was going to share with you today the story of my own garden in Sharon and some of its pleasures and how it led to my career in making public spaces in New York City. Hi, John. I'm a plant person who, I love plants, and this thing above me comes from this wonderful children's book called Miss Rumphius. Do you know it? Have you read it to your children or grandchildren? And Miss Rumphius may or may not, it's hard for me to tell whether she's a real person or not, but the story is that she spread the blue lupins all over the state of Maine, and they are there, and they are wonderful, and this was her motto, and this is my motto too. I found it at the Coastal Maine Botanical Garden and took a picture of it, and this is what I think we all do if we're gardeners. I assume most of you are gardeners, or you wouldn't be interested in all this. But I was also a painter for 18 years and then studied horticulture at the Botanical Garden in New York because I've always loved plants. Now, that was all very fine, but then in 1976, we bought this property. It had a lovely old house, and I've never been able to find another house that suited us as well. But I used to go out trying to find some other piece of property that didn't have dead trees, poison ivy, multiflora rose, honeysuckle, the whole lot, and now porcelainberry everywhere. So it was pretty daunting, and then more important than even that, it's 5 acres, was this hideous swimming pool, which was right off the back of the house. And of course my teenage son said, "Oh, cool, Mom," when I realized that it would cost more to get rid of it than it would to eventually make it nice. But what I did was, we bought the house in '76, and then we went to live in England for 2 years because my husband had a job there, and that was wonderful. I say I was a painter who gardened when I left, and I was a gardener who painted when we came back. We used to go and see a garden every weekend, and my small boys, who are now grown-up men with families of their own, would say, "Oh no, Mom, not another garden." And so I educated my eye as a painter to see how people in England in those days, we weren't doing it so much, painted with plants. It was really very exciting. So when I came home, I had to do something about this miserable property. So I put in a yew hedge in front of the swimming pool. Here's the swimming pool. And it took a while, but if you come tomorrow, you'll see you can't see the swimming pool at all, which was what I was up to. And then I decided I had to figure out how to make some sense out of this property. So here's the house, and there's the hedge, and there's the offending pool. So it's basically a square between Cawkinstown Road and Williams Road, and 5 acres. And so I wanted to eventually have a way to walk all the way around the property and have some axes to go to. So I put the main one there, and I called it the temple, which was meant to be a joke, and sometimes contractors would come and say, do you want me to work on your temple? It's just 3 porch columns from what we made into a mudroom in the house, and I put them down there and added another one, but it looks sort of temple-like. And then here's the woodland going off this way, and there's a path going to the pool. My son lives down here, and there's a big meadow. Then the other axis goes that way, sort of north, and that I call a daydaff walk because it has daffodils and daylilies, and now I've added some more things that you'll see. And then there are a couple more little squares, those squares are couple of raised gardens, and then the nursery, which is what I called it because that's where I experiment with plants. And I put things and I decide whether I want to take it down to the city or do I like it or not. But then I tried to stop calling it the nursery when someone wrote a piece about my garden and said that's where I kept sick plants. I was very upset about that. I don't have any sick plants. Now, let's see. Somebody who knows something, come up, because there's a little thing that's popped up. And it means that I can't move the, does somebody know how to work this thing? This is what always happens in life, that these machines, they're out to get you.
It's Adele, just so you all know.
And so, see, I can't move it now. I don't know what that is, and I don't want to put in show. All right. So there's the hedge. Now, many years later, you see the temple down at the end. That's my terrace, and you can't see the swimming pool. And so I have experimented with this place for almost 40 years now. Maybe it is 40 years. And the big mistake I made when I put this garden in was that I have to see it straight on. Don't do that to yourself, because you see all your mistakes when you have to look at. If you look at it and you walk down this way, the English know what they're doing. They would do this. You don't see the mistakes because you're moving. And they're sitting there, and so for years I would make my husband jump up in the middle of lunch and move something 3 feet to the left, things like that. But by and large, it's been pretty settled for the last 10 or 15 years. Now, this is a picture of it, and these are mixed orders, and I picked that up from going to Great Dixter in England. Christopher Lyden's always writing about mixed orders. And that means it's got shrubs, evergreens, perennials, annuals, and bulbs. And that means that manipulating this, as I did all the time, you get to see something interesting all year round. End of March is not one of the best times in anybody's garden, but most of the time there are things to see. And you can see that there's the hedge, and there are vertical thuyas, and the rounded berberis, and then there are perennials, some annual and the Kochianda here, lots of different colors of the different foliage. This is the woodland in the early spring, and it's got lots of mertensia and a Halesia in it. But when you see it tomorrow, there's very little out. My garden is mostly a garden at its best, from July to the end of October. So Ann Coffin bludgeoned me into doing this, and I said, well, we'll just have to make a disclaimer. You will have to see that what you're going to look at is what I like best, which is textures and foliages and forms, all the things that I used as a painter. And so I love the flowers when they come, but I'm not so dependent on them. But when I realized that I made the transition from being a private gardener to doing big places in the city, I thought about the difference between being a painter. I did these big abstract collages, and that there are 3 things that a gardener has to deal with that a painter doesn't, that add to what you do as a painter. And can you think what they are? The first one is soil. Not too much of that in my studio. And then there's weather. You have to deal with the weather, and then you have to know about time. You have to know how big that plant is going to get next year, or is it going to overwhelm its neighbor, or all that kind of thing. Makes it much more interesting than just straight painting. This is more or less what the woodland looks like now. Big, huge groups of different kinds of shapes and textures and colors of green. And I love dark reds. Because I was a painter, I know that reds and greens, they're opposite each other on the color scale, and the reds make the greens look greener. And so I always have red everywhere I go. And this is a Japanese maple and a great big pot that came down from Maine to and the paths pull all the woodland together. This is the Daydaff walk. The daffodils have finished and dropped down. The daylilies are coming. And I put nepeta in there, which I'm hoping will cut down on the maintenance. It also, I know in New York City, it might interest you to know that I use it to keep those relatives of the squirrels, the ones that don't have the fur on their tails. When you have those, if you put nepeta, they go away. But I don't have that problem here, but I love nepeta with the alliums. So I have to think of some other name besides the daydaff fork, and that's the bench from my English garden down at the end. Always working to carry the eye down, so even if you don't go, you say to yourself, what's down there? I might go down and see. This is one of the raised gardens. I discovered that my soil is so good because I make lovely compost. And so a lot of plants that I like, dianthus, the beautiful gray helictrichum, things like that, they don't like rich soil. So I created this little garden, which is about 18 inches, you can see here. And it has loads and loads of gravel, both in the soil, but also everywhere. Gravel, I've really gotten interested in gardening with gravel. It looks, you can have all kinds of chaos, and it looks perfectly nice when it's got gravel. And lots of things will seed themselves around in these conditions. And then this is my playpen in the nursery in the summertime. So more things are out then. Nephophias, I never used to think I liked them, now I adore them. So I play with things. Eryngiums, Nephophias, the cranberry is almost out right now. So this is, I like to surprise myself by using plants that I didn't think I was going to like, or putting combinations or colors together. I have long since learned that I love dark red and orange and things like that, but I had to find that out by playing in here. And then down at the end there is a little pond and a stream, which is a wet place, and so it has water until last week, and now it has a 500-gallon tank and a pump that comes up and brings it up by the road and down into the pond. And I adore frogs, and I hope that my frogs are going to be happy, and there'd be lots of them. I count them constantly. This is what the border looks like in July, and somebody once described this as careless rapture. That's what Browning said, and I think of it because I like it to look as if it just happened, but of course it's not a bit careless. You work very hard to make it look as if it just happened. And also I wanted to point out, you see the box. Yes. Many plants that we work with are mounds. And then, so someone once described them as domes and minarets. And I'm always looking for minarets. Foxgloves are minarets, those two little white tutors. You see the ornamental grass doing its kind of explosion, that's a kind of a minaret. Because if you didn't have those things, then it'd be an awful lot of just round things. Here it is in the fall, and you can see the dark reds again, and there's the pool, which I've made look perfectly nice now with my all ill-gotten gains in public gardens. Put a little bit each year into making the pool look a little better. And then this is what I see out my kitchen window in the wintertime. I put those thujas, they're called smaragd or emerald, and they were my size 35 years ago, I guess, and now they give me great joy. They look like cypresses. They're about 25 feet tall, and one of these days in the wintertime they're going to come down, but I'm sure. But I love them. There are two on one side and two on the other. And the hedge, which wasn't very big in the beginning, I've curved it round so it's about 200 feet going all the way around. And that's my composition, that's my painting, and I have to look at that all year round. Then I have fun playing around with the other things. But I love contrasts and color and form, and this is helictotrichum with some ballerina tulips against the dark red berberis. Now don't be shocked because I have masses of berberis crimson pygmy. I will not be bludgeoned into getting rid of that plant. It has never so much as given me a seedling in 40 years. The one that's out in the field, yes, that's very invasive, but this is a cultivar, and so I use it with great joy. Here are some combinations on the terrace with the border in the background, and see the dark reds. There's a cordylides, and this is Euphorbia catinifolia, with contrast with the variegated that's a euphorbia too, and some hydrangeas. And then this you will see tomorrow is my joy, this little orange poppy called Papava rubrifragmum, and it seeds itself around, and I deadhead it constantly so that it'll keep on blooming. And then in about the beginning of October, I stop deadheading it so that it will seed itself all over the place. And that's there with one of those wonderful hostas that are called mouse ears, because they're only this big. I love mouse ears. And there's a beautiful blue hosta with a combination with a Haconocloa and a purple Simicifuga. And the vine on the fence is one of those kiwi vines. For a while it died. We thought it died, and now it's come back, and I call it the Alice in Wonderland plant, and you look at it tomorrow, because on one side it has pink and white, as if, and then if you turn it over, there's nothing on the back side. So I think it's like, you remember in Alice in Wonderland when they got out and they painted the roses? Somebody's painted the top of the leaf, and there's nothing on the back side. And this is a summer arrangement with the Eryngiums, Miss Wilmot's ghost, various euphorbias, yellow berbers. Those are Eryngiums up there, and some echinacеas. And then here's an example of the kind of thing that gives me great pleasure, and it has I don't think it has any flowers at all. The berbers is in the front for the red, and that would be Phlox bright eyes, and there's some phalaris grass and a beautiful blue hosta, and I think that up there is a tree peony, and I think that the variegated thing up there, that's Cornus ivory halo, which has green and white leaves in the summer. Flowers, I don't even think you ever notice them. And then it has red stems in the winter. Now, one of my passions is hydrangeas. And there were, the one that is right there to the left here was on this place, and I've moved it all over. I've moved it in the full shade, and it still blooms. It's out in the meadow. This actually was planted on the other side of that hedge, behind that arch. And it knew how much I loved it, I guess, because it just came right through the hedge. And it looks kind of like a climbing white rose, but it's a hydrangea. That's Arborescens grandiflora, and that's a native one. And then the one to the right, that is a standard quickfire. So that kind of thing gives me a charge. And then here's the temple with the limelight hydrangeas all around it. I planted them about 15 years ago. They're all about 6 or 8 feet apart, I guess, and they've just, probably because they are a little close together, they push up. So they're very tall. They bloom like mad all summer. Here's a close-up of them. And then in the wintertime, they're beautiful because when the snow's on those flowers, I can see them back up at the house. And at nighttime, in the daytime you see the border with all this stuff going on, and then in the nighttime I light the thuyas, the gates, the 3 gates, the arch, and the temple. So I can sit up at the house, and it's like yin and yang. You don't see all the excitement of the plants, you just see the features, but you do see those hydrangeas even in the dark. And then this is blue billow here, which is covered with buds now and will bloom in a few weeks, I think. Very cobalt blue. It's a serrata, which means it comes from Korean mountains, and it's tough as nails. I used to have lots of macrophyllus. Those are the lovely mop heads, and I adored them. But there was so much work to try to cover them up in the winter time and all that, that I ended up I've been working at the New York Botanical Garden for over 30 years. So they sent up a truck, and I sent down about 32 different ones, and they're in a border at the Botanical Garden, display that I'm not going to eat my heart out and work my tail off trying to make them bloom around here, because they won't. But lots of these other things do, and that's what makes it so wonderful. The plant to the right of the hydrangea is a cornice dogwood called Golden Shadows, and it's tiered like a wedding cake. You'll see that tomorrow. This is a big quickfire. The other, my standard, is a little quickfire. This is a bigger one, and it blooms like this, and then it turns really quite dark red in the end of the year. And then I paired it with a little red pinacetum to, I like the contrast of that, and you see the foliage of the hosta. And then feverfew. Feverfew is everywhere for me, and I just pull it out when I don't like what it's doing. Here's another hydrangea, which is for the collector in me. It's called New Wave, and it's a macrophylla, so it would, if it wanted to, bloom. But it won't, because of where we live. But I don't care, because I think that foliage is just to die for. And so I just sit and enjoy the foliage. And then this one on the left is Pinky Winky. Now, whoever named that should be shot. That is the worst name. But apparently the real name of it is PW4293, something like that. And so I guess somebody took PW and called it Pinky Winky. But it's a wonderful one. And it has very nice shiny foliage. And then those flowers, and they go very late in the year. They're wonderful. All these hydrangeas are great to cut and dry. And then down at the bottom of it, this is one of the great annuals, and I just stopped at Claire's this morning. I called nurseries all over here looking for Angelonia, angel face pink, and finally they had it at Claire's, so I stopped and got it this morning. But it's a wonderful annual if you don't know it, because it is, and I don't say this lightly, virtually maintenance-free. You never have to deadhead it. It blooms from now until October, and it's so pretty, has shiny green foliage. So it comes in different colors, so do look for Angelonia. And then this is my favorite plant in the world, the oak-leaved hydrangea, at the end of the season when it turns these wonderful colors, and I'll tell you more about it because you'll see it in all my public gardens. But this is a native plant. It was found in Georgia, in Macon, Georgia, in 1787 by William Bartram, growing on a rock outcropping. So it's unlike other hydrangeas. It doesn't need a lot of water, and actually if it gets overwatered, the way what happened with Sandy and some of my gardens down by the water, all the hydrangea quercifolias died because they were in too much water. The other ones didn't mind. But it's good in 4 seasons and pays the rent, as I say, in 4 seasons, so I use it a lot. Now, meantime, I was doing all this, taking courses and everything, and a friend of mine, Betsy Rogers, was restoring Central Park, 183 acres of Central Park. This is only 6 acres of it. And you can see with the Central Park in behind, Central Park was designed brilliantly by Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1850s to look as if it just happened. He wanted New Yorkers to have a sense of nature, and he felt and said and wrote about how it would change people's lives. Everybody forgot that he'd said that. And then we found it out again when we started restoring New York and the park. But you see, the conservatory garden was put there in the 1930s. It was an early WPA project. Mayor LaGuardia was mayor then. He lived right nearby. It's in 3 sections, 6 acres, and it's at 105th Street and 5th Avenue. And you come into the green thing, the garden, with the double flowering crabapple alleys the first week in May. And this is what it looks like now, of course. But this is what it looked like when I was asked to go up there and restore it. My friend said, I think you should get up there and restore it. And I told her she was as mad as a hatter. In those days, this was 1982, the city was polarized, people were afraid of each other, the park was in terrible condition, there was terrible crime. And so to go up into the northern end sounded pretty daunting to me. I told her she was crazy, and she said, well, I want, you know about plants, and I want an artist's eye, so just go up and look at it. And I took these pictures at that time. But I fell in love with this deserted, beautiful, overgrown place, very romantic. This was what the planting beds looked like, all overgrown with Buddleia and Lysimachia and stuff like that. Anyway, so I ended up having to fix it, and started in the fall of '82, and I still go up there all the time. I had to, she told me, I want you to restore all the plantings. I want you to raise all the money, and you can't use any of my big donors. And I want you to bring the people back. Of course, it wasn't true. She helped me. But I didn't go near her big donors, that's true. And then what was very, very remarkable was I had no idea how to bring the people back. I said, I'm going back to my studio, you worry about that. But it was the garden that brought the people back, and I didn't know that then. So this is what the garden looks like last week. And you can see do you see things that look like my garden in it, you see. And the young people who work for me in all these properties in New York, they come up here and they say, oh, I see where you got that from. Up there's the rounded red berberis and the grasses and the Hyconocloa and lots of alliums. And then here it is in the summertime. And it's, you remember, it's a mixed border, so there are ornamental grasses that I use as exclamation points, and there are shrubs and perennials and annuals and bulbs. This is the bulb of an allium. And down at the end, that beautiful blue thing is something we can't have here, Vitex, which is so gorgeous. But in this very bad winter, where we had the very bad cold, it's now died back to the ground. I was looking at it yesterday, but it'll come back. And then here's that same spot in the fall. There's my beloved hydrangea, and the ornamental grass is turning tawny. And this is a Nicotiana, so that's a very late annual. And by this time, I began to see that what I did, because I like to do it, and Betsy, everybody told me, by the way, you can't possibly do this. You crazy? Those people pointing in the direction of East Harlem, because it's up in the northern end, near the poor neighborhood of East Harlem, oh, they'll trash it, there's no question. So don't do anything but marigolds and red salvia. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm incapable of doing that. Betsy said, you do what you want to do. But it never occurred to any of us that by making the garden like this and having it change constantly was what made people come back. And now, my goodness, yesterday I walked up and it was just, there was a wedding going on and there were people everywhere. It's very exciting when I think how deserted it was when I started. And so winter is 5 months of the year in New York, and most of the time these public spaces were empty, miserable, depressing. They had no plants in them. So I tried to make it interesting in the wintertime. Now over in the distance beyond the woman with the purple coat is this part of the garden that I've been showing you. There are 7 large beds, about 75 by 115 feet by about 75 feet long, and then there are interior ones where we have the annuals. But left over from the days when the garden was built, and it was designed, I remember to tell you, by a woman with the wonderful name of Betty Sprout, who was a landscape architect who worked for the Parks Department. And her beautiful hedges and her trees are all there. And on the right is a buddleia, which just happens to have snow in it, so it looks as if it were in flower, but of course it isn't. Now, people come a lot in the wintertime now because we've found ways to make it more interesting, to leave things up, like those grasses, to wave back and forth. And so people come really in the middle of big snowstorms. You find people up there. So you remember that everybody told me I couldn't do it, that people would trash it. There's no point in doing anything nice. And I kept thinking about Olmsted and how he said that if you make something beautiful and you give people a connection with nature, it will change their lives. And that's what happened. And it was because the garden changes constantly, because there's always something to see, and because people feel that somebody cares about them if they make a place like this for them. And that's terribly important. And so this was back, this picture, well, the garden took me 2 or 3 years to get it all restored and to start volunteer programs and raise the money and get an endowment so that I have a staff and all that. But by 1986, other places began coming to me saying, hell, if you could do that up in Harlem, you better come down and do it in Bryant Park. This is Bryant Park, which was indeed very, very dangerous. The Conservatory Garden was not. People of East Harlem loved the Conservatory Garden. It was one of the 2 places most avoided, the garden was, but it wasn't dangerous. Bryant Park was dangerous. And there was a murder in there in 1987, a drug-related murder, so they closed it down. And I was asked to put 2 300-foot borders on either side of the lawn. And it opened again in '92, and here are people sitting with the movable chairs that we have everywhere now, everywhere in New York, but they've started here. And people sitting on the benches that I put inside the mixed borders. And it was really designed to be an oasis. I assume you all know that Bryant Park is anything but an oasis now. It is a happening. It is so full of ice skating rinks and fashion shows and chess games and movies. It's unbelievable. And of course, people love it, but it's quite different from what it was when we first did it. And this was when it was an oasis. But now it's full of thousands and thousands of people all the time. But what we learned in there was that if the area around it was in terrible condition when we started working on Bryant Park, and in the end, when it was opened and restored, all of the people in these buildings who were being taxed, as it were, as for a business improvement district to pay for this, had been complaining bitterly, well, this is never going to work. Well, within a week, people began being able to rent whole floors of these buildings. And now it is an economic boom in the middle of Manhattan. And there's a hotel across the street called the Bryant Park, which we all laughed over because in those days Bryant Park was synonymous with crime and degradation. And so it's been a very exciting thing to be involved with, but it wasn't exactly the way I hoped it would stay. This is Madison Square Park, which I think is a more wonderful park if you want something a little bit less chaotic. It's between the Empire State Building and the Flatiron behind you in this picture. It's 6 acres again. The Conservatory Garden is 6 acres, Bryant Park is 6 acres, Madison Square Park is 6 acres. It was in terrible shape in 2000, and so the restoration of it started. At the time, there was no one in there. There were these old trees. It's quite an old park. There was no one in there but squirrels, pigeons, and those guys I told you about with the fur on their tails. And when I was landscaping it, you had to be really careful to watch where you were stepping because there were so many rat holes you could sprain an ankle. I put 20,000 plants in there, shrubs, small trees, because there wasn't much room for trees because these lovely trees were there, but shrubs and perennials. And in this compacted earth, men had to use pickaxes and mattocks in order to make holes to put the shrubs and perennials in. So I mulched it with 2 to 3 inches of straight compost, which I ordered from the island, and it came in these trucks, and we all cheered when it arrived, and we put it all around all of the planted areas. And then, as you undoubtedly know, when you have compost, the little microorganisms that are inside all that millions and millions in a handful, they filter down and loosen up the soil and make the plants thrive. And I call it the only trickle-down theory that ever actually worked. And it does work. And here are some of the 350 hydrangeas that I put in there, with lots of hostas, of course, and ferns, and quite a wide variety of plants. And then over here, you see that building. That's the Shake Shack Now, you must know what the Shake Shack is, and this is where it started, in Madison Square Park, because we all knew that people love to eat in parks. And Danny Meyer, who started it, first he had a little push cart with lemonade and hot dogs, and then he made the Shake Shack, and as we say, the rest is history. I gather there's practically a Shake Shack everywhere in the world now, and he's still the nicest man you can imagine after all that. So that was one of the things that works very well in Madison Square Park, along with the plantings. There's a lovely playground. And originally when we started it, of course, there was no neighborhood at all. So when they put in the playground, I said, why would you want a playground? There's no families around here. Now it is the most wonderful place to live, and there are so many families, and the playground is jammed. Now this is right at the entrance to Madison Square Park, and I love to make people happy by giving them lovely plants to look at. And this guy was mesmerized by those elephant ears. In fact, to such an extent that I took this picture, and then he stood there so long I went around the other side of him and took him from the other side. His mouth was practically open. That kind of thing, just, it makes everything you do worth it. It was such fun. Now this is the New York Botanical Garden, where we just had our ball party last night, me in my pearls and my evening dress and everybody in this garden, but it didn't look like that. That's what it looked like when the donor, who was in the Watson family, had underwritten and had a plaque, and she asked to have it removed because it was so ugly. So someone called me and said, oh my God, I've seen what you've done in the conservatory garden. You better come up and do something here. So we had to take out all these plants that were in rows and didn't look nice under this lovely tree. And of course I've been a student there, so I was thrilled to be able to work at the Botanical Garden. And I'm still there all these years later. So we put a garden with lots of cool colors under that pine tree. And you can see the blue hosta, some dark red sand cherry, lots of different foliages. And then here's a lovely combination that I enjoy with the pink hydrangea, and that is a Stilbe Tuchetti Superba, which is, I don't really like the early ones so much. They need so much messing. You have to put compost on them all the time and stuff. This thing doesn't ask for any of that. It's such a pretty plant. And then a year later, we did the other side of the main path there. I put yew hedges all around it so that it made it a special place. A garden has, in some translations, it means enclosure. And then, even though it's called the perennial garden, I put loads of shrubs in there, because shrubs give you the form and the heft to get you through the winter, and I very much want people to enjoy this all year round. So this is called the Hot Garden, and this is actually exactly what it looked like last night. And it has bright red, fire engine red colors and oranges and yellows, but no pink. Although I must say, when I was looking at this, that salvia looked a bit on the pink side. I think I probably had it moved. There was a rose that was red when it first came out, and then it turned pink, so I moved it back a ways. But this is the hot garden, so you have the cool garden. And being a botanical garden, everything's labeled. So the idea is that you teach people what they might like to have in their own garden. And you see people all the time taking notes. And then this is in that same hot section in late October, early November. That's the Amsonia blooming there. A wonderful native plant that turns orangey in the fall. And you see all the different contrasts that I like to put the blue-greens and the conifer and the iris, and then people are just enjoying looking at all the different colors, not just of the flowers at all, but of the foliage. And then in the wintertime, the different blues and greens and tawny colors of the shrubs and the grasses, lots of things to see in the wintertime as well. And because it's a teaching garden, I took this picture, that made me happy that this child was going to learn about how wonderful and magical plants are. Maybe she'd always remember that in her life. Columbia University. University campuses need to be beautified. If you are lucky enough to get your hands on them as I have. This is one of the great institutions of this world with McKim, Mead, and White gorgeous buildings. This is what it looked like in 1996 when I started working with a group of preservationists and architects and landscape architects. They had not touched this beautiful campus since the riots of 1968. They were furious at the students for that, and they just said, there's no point in your doing anything, those kids will ruin it. And of course they wouldn't, and they let me, and I'm still there doing it all these years later. So I've done the whole campus, and I've done most of it in blues and whites with dark reds, because those are the colors of Columbia. And in the foreground, that is a salvia called Blue Hill. And you see how its blue spires contrast domes and minarets. They're little minarets with the domes of the hydrangea behind it with the big fat flowers. And then feathery foliage of a spirea back there, and there's some wonderful big blue hostas and some foliage, I think, of hellebores on the right, I think. So it's a 24-acre campus, and we've done pretty much the whole thing now. And then this is what we do in the winter. I send somebody down to the flower district, and we buy dyed willow twigs, and we stick them in all over the place, where you have them against the evergreens so that you have the color of the red and the green. We make them look as if they were red-stemmed dogwoods, but they're not. And it gives, and then when the perennials start, you just take them out, put them in someplace and do it again next year. Now here's a campus that really, really needed help. This is one of the SUNY campuses. It's out in Stony Brook, Long Island. 1,000 acres of concrete. The wonderful president who hired me with architects to improve this said the only people who like the Stony Brook campus are the concrete industry of Long Island. Really, really ugly place. And she said, I can't afford to fix the buildings, which are equally ugly, but I could have enough money if you'll try to make the landscape look a little better. So this is what we did. We took out the concrete, we improved the soil, we put down acres of sod, we made big gardens. Well, no, they're not gardens, that's the point. I use garden plants, but they're landscapes. They're sweeping swirls of things. That's the administration building. They're everything. That's not as ugly as some of them. But by mitigating the landscape, it made people not so aware of what an ugly place it was. Here's another example. I used the Japanese bloodgrass to contrast with that blue juniper, blue star, and that's a Chamaecyparis, the mops, and then there's some sedums in there. That blue spruce is deliberately there to go against that brick building to make it look nicer, and some eupatorium in the background and echinacea, but there's a huge variety of things all sweeping all around. We ended up doing 12 acres. Here in the fall is Persicaria firetail in the foreground with white Japanese anemones and a lot of different grasses. And that bank is just covered with ground cover, but in the spring it has a couple of thousand daffodils on there. And so the people who really loved this was the administration and the admissions office. The admissions office used to tell me that they had to spend a lot of time deciding what not to show prospective students because it's so ugly. But then once we did this, their admissions just skyrocketed. And I took this picture and didn't realize till I got home how her shirt goes with those perennial hibiscuses. But you can see Perovskia, dark red, Prunus sistena, very lush, to contrast with the severity of that ugly sea of concrete. Back in New York, this is the Chelsea Piers on the Hudson River. Again, not a very attractive building. This is not McKim, Mead, and White. And so I was asked to do a garden here, and so I deliberately decided if I couldn't beat it, I'd join it. So it's lots of blues and reds. There are loads and loads of red knockout roses, lots and lots of nepetas and salvias, and you see the umbrellas. We chose them exactly so that they would go with the building. And so the building doesn't seem quite as overwhelming as it did before. And here's another little space also in Hudson River Park where we do lots and lots of oranges in the spring. It's all around that. I don't really like that statue much, but of the apple. But people like to climb in and out of it and stuff. So for contrast, loads of orange tulips, yellow foliage, and then in the summer, masses of bright red and oranges to go, because the buildings, you see the buildings are blue, and then the river's right here. So that's good complementary colors. Now, this is one of the things I'm working on right now, which is the wonderful new proposed extension to the Frick Museum, and I am doing, you see the garden there. I'm in charge of making sure that the Russell Page Garden is restored. There will be construction. The Russell Page Garden was built. It is a roof garden. It's right on the roof of a great big huge vault, and it started leaking apparently a few days after it was put in 1977. So when we do the much needed renovations for the museum, never touching the mansion at all. But then we will save everything, we've documented, we've researched it, and the garden will go right back where it was before, and no one will see anything any different. Now, going from the sublime and the sophisticated to quite a contrast, this is a tiny little park at Park Avenue between 96th and 97th. Now, you know, I'm sure that Park Avenue is, again, a shelf, a roof over the tracks of the trains coming out of Grand Central. And they stopped at 96th Street before this little piece of park. It's about a quarter of an acre. And so all the rich people have expensive apartments and they have landscaping. Landscaping improves property values. And they left the people of East Harlem to look at this. And can you see where the trains are coming out at 97th Street? And somebody once said, how do you have the energy for all of this? And I said, moral indignation is a great motivator. I thought it was outrageous that they left this thing looking like this for the people who live north of 96th Street, which includes me, but I don't live right here. So I persuaded the city officials to put up some money, and we redesigned it, and it looks like this now. Oh. And it's very, very nice. The Parks Department guy, we worked together, and it has all these seating walls. And at that time, it's about 10 years ago, so I took 30 years worth of knowledge about what was easy to take care of and filled it with nepeta, lots of variegated yuccas, the knockout roses here with the nepeta and the variegated dogwood. And you see all the benches. Seating is absolutely key, and when I design a public space, I put the benches in before I even put in the plants. Because benches have a message. They say, you're welcome, come and visit, come and sit down, stay in this nice place, we did it for you. And people hear that. And so this guy just happens to be there, but behind him, that building didn't look like that before we put this park in. And it has a roof garden, and then there are little shops and restaurants. There's a Jamaican food place, there's a Mexican restaurant around the corner, there's a big grocery store so people can buy their lunch and come and sit in 97th Street. And here it is later in the summer with lagerstromias, the crepe myrtles, which have beautiful flowers for 6 weeks in the summer and gorgeous bark. They're quite hardy in New York. And you see the variegated yuccas, which I use all the time, all over the place, because they're such wonderful minarets again, but they are beautiful in all seasons, and I'll show you. So here's the fall with red maples, and the lagerstromias turn a nice color, and there's my beloved oak-leaved hydrangea. And then here is the wintertime when those variegated yuccas, despite the snow and despite looking so tropical, there they are to give people pleasure even in the wintertime. Now, one of my jobs is to teach people to put the right plant in the right place. And do you think that guy got it? Oh, I love this picture. I have it over my desk and it makes me laugh every time. And I don't think that little evergreen has ever grown an inch in there. So I do when I'm showing people what I'm going to do for them, I make something like this, which is just done from the computer, but shows all the different textures and colors and that you can put together in a garden. This I have in my garden now, and a great deal of it. But this was for doing a big garden out in an arboretum. No, wrong way, definitely the wrong way. Oh dear God, it's stuck.
Oh,
She's outside.
She's
she
outside.
was outside.
Oh. Okay, never mind, poor Margaret. So here's my commercial for the oak leaf hydrangea. I speak all over the country. People ask me to come and talk about the benefits of beautifying their cities, and it's so much fun. And I always ask them to grow the oak leaf hydrangea, and I see them more and more now all over New York, but when I go to other places, and you can see how beautiful the flower is, great big leaves, has interesting bark in the winter. So it's a great, great plant. In 2009, I wrote a book because I decided that if I got run over by a bus, that I wouldn't have had a chance to pass on to people all the millions of things I learned, not to mention all the wonderful stories about all the things that people do in these places. So I wrote this book, and it tells about how to restore and design public space, and how to maintain it, and how to work with volunteers, and how to raise money, and so forth and so on. And I love to teach, and so I teach when I lecture, and I teach here. This is in Wagner Park, which was the one, no, not Wagner Park, the Chelsea Cove Park, which was the one with the Chelsea buildings. But, excuse me, I also teach at NYU. I teach young college students. It's called the Elements of Successful Public Open Space. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I've got these marvelous acolytes who go out now and fix up public space. And just quickly, this is the Daffodil Project, which I started the day after 9/11, so that would mean 9/12, when I got a message from my Dutch bulb grower saying he was sick about what had happened to New York and he wished he could do something. And it's a mistake to ask me that, because I got to think of it. And I thought, oh, I wonder if he has any extra bulbs. So I wrote him back and said, you don't have any extra bulbs, do you, Hans? 2 weeks later, when the harbor of New York opened, one of the first boats that was on it had 1 million daffodils given to the city of New York so that we could plant them in memory of the people who died. But also because I knew that first of all, New Yorkers came out by the thousands to help plant them, because people wanted to do something, do you remember? But also I knew that the next spring would make people see that nature would heal New York, that nature would do for them what I had learned that it would. So I believe that I make these places, and I call them sanctuaries for the soul of city dwellers. And I think that there is an unspoken message in places like this. It's, we did this for you and you're worth it, and people hear it. And so then they feel that their communities and their cities care about them. And people love to be surrounded by things that are beautiful, and that makes everyone happy, and we all benefit from that. So back to Ms. Rumphius. As we all know, there is so much in this world these days, which is cold and hard and mean and terrible. And so we all, in our own gardens and any place you can, let's all do everything we can to make the world more beautiful. Thank you. Oh, sure. That's what I was going to say. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Yes, what?
Do you have deer at your
Oh,
property in
heavens.
Sharon?
Oh, in Sharon. Oh, yeah, and I have a 5-acre deer fence.
Oh, good.
I put it in for our 23rd anniversary because I remember it cost $2,300 in November when nursery people didn't have enough work to do, so they were happy to do it. Been married 51 now. So it's been there a long time. But I did see, I told you, a woodchuck. And I called to see if my husband was all right. He just was 91 last week. He said, I'm fine, but so is the woodchuck. He's right outside.
This is not a question. This is an expression of gratitude. This is the second time I've heard you speak, and I heard you say you must do something to make the world more beautiful. And when I retired from my job as a social worker and therapist and program director, thinking that I needed to do something in my field, when you said, just make the world more beautiful, I went to work for the Conservancy in Central Park, and I've never been happier, and so I thank you publicly.
It's marvelous working in Central Park.
Oh,
And
it is
you
the
think
most
that
fun.
Olmsted 150 years ago understood this, and then we all forgot it. And then the city went to hell in a handbasket, and everybody was being mugged and afraid of each other. And now because of Central Park, and because that's bleeding out into all the other parks around the city, people smile at each other all the time. People talk to each other in these places. So that's a beautiful story. Thank you so much.
Practically, how do you protect against insects and viruses in public spots?
I've never heard anybody ever complain about insects and viruses. But we don't spray anything. The botanical garden does, because it's 250 acres. And they do on the day when nobody's there. But none of my other places do we ever spray anything. We don't use fertilizers either. We treat the soil with compost. And if the plant is a big problem and attracts a lot of bugs, off with his head. Let's get rid of it. Nature gives us lots and lots of opportunities to do something else. So. Okay, well, oh, yes.
I was going to
Paige.
say how admiring I am of you.
Oh, thank you, Paige. I of you.
Extraordinary. Just extraordinary to see what you've done.
I say to my husband all the time, I'm so lucky. I've done what apparently I know how to do and I love to do. And I'm still doing it. I've never been so busy. People say to me, are you going to retire? Retire? I couldn't even possibly do it. I've got 6 projects going at once, plus getting ready for my teaching next fall. And then I've got my own garden to fuss with, don't I? Had to get it good for you guys. That was a lot of work. But I do want to say that because my garden is floriferous in July, you have to come and look at my different plant combinations of textures and leaves and things and enjoy that with me, because there are some things in bloom, the peonies obviously, but I'm not a rose person, so I don't have roses, and I just have beautiful plants that give me joy that I'm looking forward to sharing with all of you. Yes?
You learned this, or some of it anyway, in England. You have, I think you've sometimes done a French garden, and could you describe the difference?
Well, now the French are doing the same gardens that we're all doing. But originally, I would have said a French garden was the kind of thing you'd see at Versailles with begonias and Dusty Miller and everything in straight lines. Russell Page did a sort of a French garden at the Frick. It's very calm and rectangular and elegant. But the French have now become passionately interested in the stuff we're all interested in. So the English and the French are going back and forth, enjoying each other's nurseries and gardens and everything. So I don't know what you think, Paige, but I adore French gardens, but I don't think of them as looking different exactly. It's not, they don't look like Versailles anymore at all.
My God.
Of course, when I did a conference this winter for 350 people at NYU called Keeping NYC Green, the Importance of Horticultural Maintenance, and it was about trying to celebrate the people who are the gardeners and say, Jesus, we've got 1,700 parks and we have 100 gardeners. I mean, that's so ridiculous. But I did show a picture from Versailles time, you know, those ones of the gardener, and he's got the plants are his costume, and he has all these jewels, and was saying that in Louis XIV's time, he would have people plant 50,000 plants before breakfast, and then maybe they'd have to take them out that night and put another 50,000 in the next day, literally.
But I thought there was a difference in color, particularly in the use of color.
Not these days, I don't think. Would you say? They're just wonderful gardens in France. The Italian gardens, I think, still many of them, especially the beautiful old ones, have retained a different look. The evergreens and the beautiful geometry. But French gardens are just smashingly gorgeous, like all gardens that one might like, I think. What do you think?
Well, the chateau gardens are still very, very French.
Yes,
and-
like that one that has all the vegetables, I can't remember.
Well, Villandry and
That's
Vol de
Villandry.
Vicomte and.
Vol de Vicomte, yes, that
It's
would be a
just-
French
it's
garden, and that's very
extraordinary.
French.
And Cornwall.
Yes, Cornwall, yes, and that is very Le Notre, the beautiful
Well,
pool.
there's just lots of trees.
I guess I gravitate to the ones that are full of plants because I... Thank you very much.
Thank you.